In your story, anything goes. You want fairies? Sure. You hate fairies and you want vampires instead? Sure. You hate both of those and instead just want it to be about dogs becoming USDA officials? Awesome. Especially before agents, beta readers, and publishers get in the mix, anything goes. Literally. Have at it. You are also the only one to decide what systems your story features and how the society in your book works. While I will always defend artistic freedom, replicating racism, classism, sexism, and other kinds of oppression in your book is never a good look. It's important to critique instead of blindly reproduce, especially when you're writing dystopic fiction. You can't just put people into casts and call it dystopia. Either your book questions the powers that be, or it reinforces the status quo. I want to talk about how fiction bleeds into reality, how the worlds we make up can have a larger impact on our world than just book sales. When starting to write a book, you have to think about buy-in. How much should the main character believe in regards to what they're told about society? Should they believe in the system that's set up? Should they follow it without question, or should they have a few questions, or should they have all of the questions? What should the reader think about the main character's beliefs? This is one of the many things that makes fiction fascinating to me. You can play around with what society at large says, what the character is told about society, what the character knows about society, and what the character believes about society. The possibility for dramatic irony is endless. Take as a great example Katniss Everdeen from The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. I'm really bad at describing plots, so I'll save everyone from that, and I'm sure everyone by now knows at least a little something about it. The Hunger Games does a great thing in that Katniss is never, not once, ever swayed by the Capitol. No amount of fancy dresses, makeup, or friendly faces distract her from the reality. This is an oppressive regime that could very well get her and everyone she's ever loved killed. Even when she wins, when she gets that stable life she's always wanted, she never ever forgets what it cost her and who did it. The reader is never encouraged to buy in to the system the Capitol has set up. In fact, the contrast between what the Capitol wants to make of Katniss and what Katniss makes of herself makes the social commentary in the series succeed. If Katniss had been swayed by the Capitol's makeup, fancy dresses, adequate food, healthcare, and the like, you could easily imagine what the critics would say. Sociopathic bourgeois nonsense, for one. I wish I could say the same for the Selection series by Kiera Cass. There's a review of this book by James Tullos, and I have to admit that man is so much more capable than I am, because they actually finished this book. My god, the poor thing actually did it. According to my Kindle library, I got 32% of the way through the book, and the last note I wrote was, and I quote, "Every scene of this book is fucking stupid." The Selection series is the best example of how encouraging the reader through the main character to buy into the system set up through the fictional world can help reinforce unconscious biases the reader has in the real world. So let's go through it. The synopsis reads, for 35 girls, the selection is the chance of a lifetime. The opportunity to escape the life laid out for them since birth, to be swept up in a world of glittering gowns and priceless jewels, to live in the palace and compete for the heart of the gorgeous Prince Maxon. But for America Singer, being selected is a nightmare. It means turning her back on her secret love with Aspen, who is a caste below her, leaving her home to enter a fierce competition for a crown she doesn't want, living in a palace that is constantly threatened by violent rebel attacks. Then America meets Prince Maxon. Gradually, she starts to question all the plans she's made for herself and realizes that the life she's always dreamed of may not compare to a future she never imagined. One of the fundamental problems of this book is how it handles its caste system. Ranked 1 to 8, jobs are handed out based on the caste system, and the caste system is determined by whatever your ancestors were doing at the time the caste system was created. Another of the fundamental problems is the alternate history in the book to justify its dystopia genre tag. After all, if you're flinging shit and seeing what sticks, you might as well fling all of the shit everywhere. The last fundamental problem is America Singer herself. What we get is a functionally broken series that reinforces all kinds of isms because the selection series replicates and never challenges. Its basic concept is about being lucky enough to get on top of the regime that was previously oppressing you. And I can't express how surprised I am that I found a book that exemplifies all of the points I wanted to make here. My original plan was to compare books like Red Queen and Divergent more and cobble something together. Maybe somehow get a list together of pros and cons for each of the books. I might have had to really scrape the bottom of the barrel of Kindle Unlimited and my local library to find enough books that fail hard enough at social commentary. But no book is as blatantly bad as this one. Probably because other authors wanted to, write and create and say something, and Kiera Cass just wanted a new season of The Bachelor. And as a quick note, I'm really trying to separate the art from the artist here. I hope you'll see why, especially considering recent events. I can't really do that. I can't look at someone who writes such crap and still think their heart is in the right place. It's not a lack of skill, but of empathy, and it's all in the way the characters are portrayed. To see just how badly this selection fails at its caste system, I heavily recommend the book Evelyn's Number by Bethany Atizadeh. Essentially, Evelyn's Number is about a girl who starts at the top of the caste system, only to be assigned an outrageously low number through one of her country's religious ceremonies. We see how this young girl has to abandon everything, her hopes, dreams, her only family left, any childhood heirloom, when she's unexpectedly victimized by the system. We see the nuance as her family connections, her previous privilege, keep her safe, or safe-ish. We also see real impacts of the caste system, not just on what they wear or what job they can have, but whether they can even travel, whether they can leave their house of employment or city, and how vulnerable that makes them to poverty and violence, and we see the repercussions of that being enforced. The entire narrative is about her loss of privilege and about trying to get her autonomy back to make the country better for everyone. The selection is about wanting to marry a cute boy. The main difference, and you can see it within the first dozen pages, is how Evelyn versus America see people. Despite her naive nature and belief in the government, there are several parts about Evelyn breaking the rules when it comes to Lola, her low-caste housekeeper turned surrogate mother, whether that's hugging her, bringing her food, or confiding in her about her nerves. The relationship works as a really good save the cat moment that doubles as the beginning of Evelyn's character arc. When she's assigned the lowest number, and it's implied that it's a punishment for her dead mother's involvement in a veiled rebellion, Lola is the first one to comfort her. On the other hand, anybody lower than America is regularly described as dirty or overweight or somehow unattractive, except for her love interest Aspen and anybody directly related to him. Anybody higher than America is portrayed as greedy, ignorant, stuck-up, and not people she wanted to live among anyway. And her relationship with her own mother figure, this time her biological mom, is a perfect example of that. Mrs. Singer is introduced with 4 or 5. She was a little on the heavy side, which was odd. She wasn't a glutton, and it's not like we had anything to overeat anyway. Perhaps that's just the way a body looks after 5 children. Yikes. America has a really odd relationship with her mother. I can see some sort of reason for it too, but you have to realize the anger is all misplaced. When talking about how she feels when her mother is pushing her to sign up for this election, not only offering a chance at a wildly better life for herself but also her family, America says, "Why did Mom have to push me so much? Wasn't she happy? Didn't she love Dad? Why wasn't this good enough for her? You were just talking about being on the verge of poverty, now you want to complain your mom wants better for you? What?" The narrative oscillates between America being super disadvantaged and being just advantaged enough that she shouldn't have to go out and do this dumb TV show thing. It not only creates shaky character motivations, but also an unlikable character. If it was clear that this was the author's intentions, it would be different. The Afterlife of Holly Chase is a great example of this. It introduces an incredibly stuck-up, horribly unlikable character, and then the main character's inner monologue interrupts after an especially heinous paragraph and says, "Yeah, I was an asshole back then." It is a definitive, unarguable point for how the author doesn't approve of her character's behavior in the beginning either. That's all intentional and for a point. You need to do that if you want to start off with an unlikable character, or be a good enough writer where you don't have to do that. It's weird. Anyway, granted, signing up to compete for the privilege of being chattel is definitely not okay, but the narrative never points out that that's the system's doing, not her caste-climbing mother. And look, I have problems with how my own mom went about things, and certainly more problems with what system she supports, but with age came the maturity and understanding that she really did her best. She's caught up in different systems just like the rest of us. She did incredibly courageous, amazing things, some not so courageous, amazing things, and political differences aside, she did her best. This misplacement of anger, of responsibility, not only comes off as misogynistic in a book that's already soaking with it, but it comes across as oddly authoritarian. Especially when you consider other things America says. The book smacks of fascist apologia. The government can't be wrong. No, it's everyone around her. It's not the government's fault that so many are living in poverty, it's just the bad choices people make. Like when she says, I think this election was meant to draw us together and remind everyone that Ilya itself was born out of next to nothing. Like we're all just temporarily embarrassed millionaires, right? We shouldn't fight for equality and justice because once we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, we'll be the ones benefiting from the regime. Somehow, America often praises the monarchy that's done so much violence to her, and yet looks on her family and others as pathetic do-nothings. It's odd that a book so authoritarian labels itself as dystopian, but here we are. And speaking of violence, this is where the world building starts to break down. At the beginning, it's mentioned that only the upper castes have access to contraception, and that's where that point ends, never to be expanded on again, at least not until the third book. It's used as an explanation for why the main character is still a virgin, and why she has a few siblings. Well, that's not how reality works. That's not how history works. Just to name a few things that happen in our own world when women don't have access to contraception, there's Roe versus Wade, there's back alley abortions, Magdalene laundries, and the abandonment and intentional killing of several million babies that continues to happen today. Certainly, while creating a world where pregnant unwed women go to jail, the author could have done a little better in expanding the consequences of such a world. There's even a part after America's been chosen as one of the contestants where it's explained the prince can rape her and she'll have no recourse, just lie back and think of Ilya. Yet it's not followed up on at all. That's a huge thing to include, especially in a young adult novel, and America just rolls over and accepts it. It's certainly never brought up again in her interactions with the prince. Shouldn't she be angry at the prince? Shouldn't she be afraid? Considering that she has to keep her virginity in order to be in the contest, being in the contest is her only chance at a really better life, and here's this asshole who can ruin it all in a moment. I mean, she should be afraid. Forgive me for not immediately swooning over the prince. And that's the main point of this book. It's to get you to swoon over this love triangle, so even the basic point of the concept isn't even done correctly. It's like trying to make a romance novel out of being sold to a harem. It's not the best look. But wait, you might be saying, you only read a third of the book. Yes, and Cthulhu willing, I'll leave it at that. The first chapter of any book is supposed to be the most polished. The most polished, the most structured, the most well-paced, the best. If a typo appears on page 2, how am I supposed to know the rest of the book isn't going to be a typo-filled monstrosity? I could read the whole book, sure, but why should I? There are so many other things to do with my time that I really have no time to waste. Nobody does. I'm not saying I DNF books because of typos. However, if the beginning of the book is filled with awful sentences, bad character dynamics, if it's a hop, skip, and a jump from blatant racism, if it's filled with body shaming and slut shaming, if it's dripping with classism and misogyny, and it's not obvious that those are intentional choices of the author, if the concept of the book is not only poorly done but blatantly miswritten, I'm not going to waste my time on it. Why should I? I shouldn't waste my time on it, and neither should anyone else. You don't have to read the entire book to know it's shit. I knew I was in for a hell of a time when the main character introduces us to her boyfriend Aspen. She takes a plate of food to her hard-working partner who belongs to a caste lower than herself. If she married him, she'd be of that caste too, so they kind of have this doomed romance thing going on, which is important to remember. Throughout this description of the scene, I want you to think about whether Aspen was intended as a foil for America, whether the author intended to use him to highlight a flaw of hers, and we'll talk about it in a bit. They get their lovey-dovey out of the way, and the conversation turns to whether America should apply for the selection or not. She doesn't want to, even considering the astronomical odds, because she loves Aspen and she wants a future with him, not some random guy she's never met. It's pretty understandable. However, being part of the selection would also get her family lots of money. It could get her enough money to, say, allow her and Aspen to get married with her family's approval. It creates an argument because Aspen, who has had a far harder life than America, knows the realities of being in the lower castes. He doesn't want that for her, and it's also understandable that the heart wants what it wants. So far, so good. This is basic conflict building 101, and it does set up one of the main conflicts of the series. They start talking about the realities of their different castes, about how they could ever manage to eke out a living when one person is on the verge of poverty and the other is already swimming in it. On page 19 of my copy, that's when America says, Aspen, we'll make it. We're smart. We'll be fine. We're smart is what a person says when they don't realize that it doesn't matter how smart you are, you can still find yourself trapped in the cycles society has set up. These are cycles specifically in place to catch people and trap them so they can be exploited, so the upper class has a steady stream of people ready and willing to wipe their asses for them. No matter how smart you are, circumstances can change in the blink of an eye. This year, more than any other, should prove that. But that attitude is more than just misguided ignorance. It's insidious. It sets up the belief that people call misfortune upon themselves, and because of that, well, why should you try to help those less fortunate? After all, they wouldn't be in that position if they were smart. Aspen goes on to say, rightly, it's not about being smart, and that America should join the selection after all. Aspen says, if you had a choice for something better than this, and you didn't take it because of me, I'd never forgive myself. I couldn't stand it. So, is Aspen the foil in this scene? Is the author wanting us to understand how misguided America is? It's hard to say. In my opinion, no. This is because even after finishing the third book in the series, The One, I never feel America ever truly grows. Here's how the foil scene goes, okay? Character A, I have this shitty opinion. Character B, I disagree with your opinion because of X, Y, and Z. Character A then says, oh, you're right, I never looked at it that way. And then character A changes and stops having that shitty opinion. It might be more complicated than that, which is sometimes why you have characters C, D, and E talking about the same thing. It's why character A goes on a journey. Aspen disagrees with her on her choice of whether to join the selection or not. He does not overtly disagree with her when it comes to her smart comment. Joining the selection would be a smart move on America's part per Aspen. Even if one were to believe Aspen is meant as a foil here, I don't think the scene works because America never changes. She never learns that everyone can be subjected to misfortune regardless of how smart they are, and the few examples we see of America interacting with people less fortunate than her don't bring home the point clearly and concisely that it's the government causing this, not just one-offs. America never realizes that it was her own sheer luck and privilege that got her to where she is and not how smart she is. America comes off as more concerned with looking like she cares for others rather than actually caring for others. Even at the very end of the third book, where one of her rivals is confirmed to be a member of the good rebels, America laments that she can't blackmail her competition away instead of, I don't know, celebrating that the two women left both want an end to the cast. It's a weird scene. Don't get me wrong, she has her moments, but that's all that they are. They're brief, fleeting glimpses into this regime she's supposed to be fighting. Moments of darkness in the third book echo the sentiments of the first. I intend to talk more about this at a later date, but I think you can judge an entire work based on how it handles traumatic scenes and the aftermath of such. As an example, take pictures from The One, pages 31 and 32. Enter Paige. This is after a meeting with the good rebels goes wrong, forcing a wounded America to flee. She comes across a homeless girl who, wasting no time, proceeds to tell her entire life story to the main character. Because I know after my traumatic periods in my life, I was also really trusting of random strangers. That was sarcasm, by the way. It's a step in the right direction. It's exactly what I would expect an author to do if they were queried by their editor to explain why they never showed the grittiness of the regime or why the rebel meeting ends so boringly. America brings Paige back to the castle with her, and the noble Prince Maxon promises that Paige will have a job doing scullery work in the kitchen or something. Though it's a step in the right direction, it's far from good writing. Ultimately, Paige disappears, never to be heard from again. Why doesn't America ever spare a thought for her? Why doesn't she try to help the other girls that weren't lucky enough to meet her? What does Prince Maxon do for the structure of society to prevent this from happening to more people? The moment arrives, we're shocked and horrified for Paige. We're so impressed that America's generous nature saves the day, and it's over. The scene is nothing but a quick gimmick to up the tension, and then it's forgotten. If anything, I would have used it as a teaching moment, maybe as a moment for America to reflect upon herself or her siblings. Use it for her to gain another friend in the castle, maybe a friend that saves her life later. Go back to the place where they met and try to help the other girls, therefore gaining a better reputation. At least use it to correct that "we're smart" comment in the first book. It's not like the series had to go there either. I could respect never talking about the darker side of life. Sometimes people just want pure escapism, no commentary. You want to write that? Go ahead. Some of my favorite games are pure escapism. Minecraft, Grow Up, even Goat Simulator. This series would have been so much better if it hadn't tried to jump on the dystopia YA train. As it is, it feels morally wrong for me to use trauma as a quick way to insert tension into lifeless writing. And overall, the series is very lifeless. America remains a very passive character. Things happen to her, she reacts certainly, but she never really does anything. The biggest steps America makes towards being an active character are both stupid in their own right, though I do have a fondness for both. The first scene, and hopefully YouTube doesn't take this video down for it, I'll lovingly call Tea Time for Terrorists. For some reason, America thinks it's the best idea ever to arrange a weapons deal between an Italian princess and one of the leaders of the good rebels. Only the event is going to be televised, photographed, and watched by everyone ever. Pick 37 shows the best sentence in the book, and unfortunately, it's also the dumbest. Does the kingdom have, any intel whatsoever? I've come across this problem myself. How do I make the antagonist scary yet defeatable? How do I make an all-seeing, omnipotent government not see my spunky main character? It's a delicate balance, but necessary. Look, I know for plot reasons that the main character had to make this deal. There are a million reasons why this scene should have been accomplished doing literally anything else other than a heavily televised tea party. However, props to the author for making America live up to her namesake by dealing with foreign nations to arm terrorists in order to bring about a regime change. The second scene is the convicting. This scene, more than any other, made me really want to like the one. Prince Maxon gives America some really pricey jewelry, and there's a heartwarming moment where she promises herself that no matter what circumstances the future brings for her, she'll never sell it. The next scene forces the girls left in the competition to sentence criminals to jail, and it's implied that the criminals are descendants instead of serial killers or muggers or what have you. Of course, America goes last, and her criminal has been sentenced to life in prison. Instead of sentencing him, she takes off all of her jewelry, gives it to him, and then the man gives all of it to the king, saying his debt has been paid. It's a sweet, touching moment. However, it's empty. We never see the man again. America doesn't even face any consequences. You'd think that if the king wanted her gone hard enough, he'd find a way to do it. By, I don't know, arranging an accident or charging her with treason for meeting with rebels? But wait, that would require the world building to actually make sense. There's some plot armor because Prince Maxon supposedly likes America too much to let his dad make her leave, but he's the king. The author needed to have picked a side. Is the king a threat or not? What happens to the other men sentenced? Where's that hint about political enemies of the king going? While it's a great scene that mirrors our own world's problem with fair sentencing and social safety nets, it's stacking another molten card onto the rotting, stinking pile of cards. It smacks a little too much of just trying to help out who you can, who you want to, instead of also fixing the societal problems that caused this situation. Miss Kardashian can have her show on Netflix, but the really important thing about it is that she's also pushing for lasting societal change, not just to free these handful of black women. Working to free individuals that have been unfairly imprisoned is amazing, don't get me wrong, but it's also really important to bring attention to an incredibly dire situation in the hopes that we can prevent unfair imprisonment altogether, which is also what that Netflix show does. Especially when America aims to be such a powerful figure in the flawed society, you would think she would try a little bit harder to change the bigger picture, or at least to see it. The biggest flaw of the third book is the two preceding it. It's stuck with the bad world building, including the lack of any real enemy. The book tries to make King What's-His-Face the enemy, but that's a bit weird when your character wants to be his daughter-in-law. It's especially weird when, at the end, nothing's undone except the caste system. Theoretically. I mean, Prince, now King, Maxon, mentions he has a few plans to end the caste, but the book ends on happily ever after instead of going into pesky details like, I don't know, the actual thing America has claimed to be fighting for this entire time. Why not just make a real decree? It ends on an odd note as, ultimately, the main character wants to preserve the system with all of its benefits and none of the moral quagmires, which is impossible. Article 15 of the Constitution of India made discrimination based on caste illegal. Real life is a lot more complicated than that, though. The concept of untouchables is still alive and well, just like racism in America didn't go away when slavery became illegal. And because the caste system in this election series is so ill-defined, how is it established? How is it enforced? What's stopping a 7 from pretending they're 3? Does it change if you get a different job? What about education? It leaves the author with no real way to do the one thing the main character wants to do. I hate to say it, but it's a waste of 3 books. Instead, the characters get to walk off into the sunset, feeling like they did something. The only system to have ended is the selection itself, at least for the time being. America never quite learns to question why things are the way they are, going from blindly following the king to blindly following the good rebels. I suppose I should talk about them. There's a reason I keep mentally putting good in quotes. One of the bigger problems in the series is the constant threat of rebels. By bigger problems, I mean that it occasionally breaks up the running commentary about dress designs and which boys she wants to marry. The stakes are higher in the third book, if you can call it that, with the rebels killing civilians outside the castle who belong to the upper caste. Ultimately, however, it just feels like the threat is not there. Granted, this might be a problem with me skipping a little less than 2 books, but even jumping into a series halfway should still make you feel like the stakes are ever present. You should even be able to pick up a book, go to the last chapter, and still feel like there are stakes. I can't think of any other series that I've read where the main enemy just hasn't been there. Probably because they weren't published. If nothing else, if your book opens with a wet hot dog bun of a first sentence, and the big bad scary threat is just throwing rocks at the palace windows and getting gunned down for it, I don't think the reader should be blamed for yawning. Cass reveals in this book that the rebels are actually of 2 camps. The northern rebels are the good guys, and the southern rebels are the bad guys. Apparently, according to August and Georgia, the 2 leaders of the northern rebels, the northerners just want voted-in officials and an end to the caste system. Reasonable enough, I suppose. The southerners, however, want an end to the monarchy and everything that comes with it. At least, we're led to believe that. We have only August's word that this is true, and the southern rebels winning is portrayed as a bad thing because, according to them, the leader just wants to be king themselves. There is literally only one moment in this entire book that you could say proves August has a point. I'm not going to cover Maxon and America's little tiff, but Maxon is just about to declare America's rival, Chris, as his bride when the southern rebels all put on red handkerchiefs and start shooting. They kill innocent people, and eventually, when the dust settles, someone explains to America that it was those dastardly southern rebels who killed everyone, including the king. The northern rebels, thanks to the weapons from Italy, helped fend them off. Am I against the killing of innocent people? Absolutely, no doubt about it. But think of how much violence the kingdom has done. I hardly think the king is innocent, and there are arguments to be made that everyone in the castle was somehow complicit in the system, even if I would say that a maid doesn't have the same amount of blood on her hands as a queen does, and you could say everyone from the maids to the queen is a victim of the system in some way. I felt so unconvinced by the whole good rebels thing. I was honestly hoping it would turn out that there was no such thing as northern versus southern rebels. It was in fact the people America had worked to arm that were gunning people down. That would be an actual twist though, and would be too nuanced for the series. Instead, we get a quick tie-up of loose ends. The king and queen die, leaving Maxon to take up the throne. There's no mention of Chris. The series ends with a little fanfare and nothing is really solved. The bad rebels are still out there. Of course, I doubt they sent their entire force to the castle. The good rebels have what they want, I guess, so they're not going to revolt. The bad king has died, so the main character doesn't have to fight the system anymore. She assumes the throne and assumes that all the problems went away when this one guy died. Feel free to tear me apart in the comment section or whatever, but I don't know who leads the Southern Rebels. I don't get to hear from their mouth what they actually want. I get the heebie-jeebies from people being okay with monarchies in the first place. What ending options does the narrative give? There are mundane ones like Aspen versus Maxon, if America is going to be queen or if it's going to be one of the other girls. But one option that is never discussed positively is the end to the monarchy, to have voted in officials all the way down, not just an end to the caste. There's a political concept that you've probably heard of called the Overton Window. Quoted straight from Wikipedia, the Overton Window is the range of policies politically acceptable to the mainstream population at a given time. It is also known as the window of discourse. As a good example, same-sex marriage would never have been on the ballot in 1950s America. However, political discourse expanded to include way more about basic human rights, as well as tolerance and knowledge about what actually causes same-sex attraction, as in nothing anyone can change. As a window of discourse, ending the monarchy in the selection series is never seen as an option. Certainly when the good rebels show up and tell America the bad rebels want an end to the monarchy, but oh yeah, don't worry, it's probably just because they want a new king of their own. It proves that ending the monarchy was never on the table. How the series handles the concept of ending the monarchy proves how superficial America's words actually are, because the ultimate caste system, the one of royalty versus peasantry, the one of upper class versus lower class, is still preserved. Maybe it was mentioned in the shit I didn't read. I don't think that's true. Instead, this whole dichotomy between the rebels is introduced as a cop-out. The good rebels get what they want, which is conveniently exactly what America wants, and America gets to be queen and gets to continue fighting rocks with gunfire and feel justified that these bad rebels deserve it. Why should I trust the author and believe the bad rebels are bad? Sure, she is the one writing the series, barely, but that feels like an excuse. Authors have a lot of power to tell their stories, especially because the story is told in first-person perspective of someone who isn't that bright to begin with. I think it's a fair question to question why the bad rebels are bad. I want Cass to show me why the bad rebels are bad. This is fiction writing 101. Show me why I shouldn't root for the main character, at least care enough to continue their story, and show me why I should root for the defeat of anyone that stands in their way. Usually when people talk about show versus tell, they mean it on a sentence level or even a character level. The girl in the steel corset gets really bad about calling the bland love interest good without showing us how he's good. In this case, you see it on a world building level, and that violates every basic writing principle that everyone, from small writing YouTube channels to world famous novelists, understand. This problem mainly stems from America not being able to get first-hand information. When she's in the castle, she's sequestered behind stone walls, only given information others want her to have. That should have been clearer and used as social commentary. It wasn't, so whatever. You can still have a way to work with that situation. To work with it, however, your main character has to realize they have no way of vetting any information. The author should have set up trustworthy versus non-trustworthy funnels of information. The series almost gets there, but because the main character's narrative never really stops to think about whether she can trust others or not, all talk about kingdom propaganda falls flat. The antagonist book to book, or even chapter to chapter, scene to scene, can change. But the big overarching antagonist is supposed to be the rebels. And if you don't show us how the bad guy is bad, you don't really have a conflict in your story. If you don't have a conflict, you don't have a point. End of. So why choose to write the story? Why choose to write a dystopian YA book where the character just blindly does whatever the authorities in her life tell her to? I hope I've convinced you that it's not a good book. It's not a good series. There are basic structural flaws everywhere, and the characters and descriptions, many of the sentences, are so horrible that it's really surprising that this series was ever published. But what does that imply for wider society? Why does it matter that this book is not only bad, but bad in such a way? Well, it adds to the constant messages that portray poor people not as innocent people stuck in traps, but people that have somehow called all misfortune upon themselves. After all, look where America's at right now. She's queen, and all because she's so smart. When we have a national debate going on about whether innocent black people deserve to be straight up murdered by the police, I think it's for the best that young people learn to question everything, especially the structures in society that already exist. We can't ignore books like this, and we shouldn't. For all its dystopian tags, this series doesn't deserve that title. In fact, I wish there was a genre tag for authoritarian. Bob Altemeyer, in his book The Authoritarians, describes not only the ins and outs of the authoritarian personality, but on page 61 talks about how authoritarians can learn to become kinder. And surprise, surprise, it's basically what everyone's been saying. Getting out of their bubble and experiencing different things leads to a kinder, authoritarian person. For example, meeting a homosexual means the authoritarian learns to be kinder to homosexuals. They learn to humanize this person and not see others like them as just another person in the outgroup. To me, that's why this book matters. Fiction offers us all kinds of experiences from all different times and perspectives. It's not only a wasted opportunity, but a reinforcement of the worst messages in society. It's a book that adds its own voice to messages like making something illegal means the problem goes away, don't challenge the structure, and it's okay to support an unjust society because to change anything you'll need to be on top of it. And last but not least, if people wanted to avoid misfortune, they should have been smarter. The Selection series by Kiera Cass encourages readers to dehumanize and objectify their fellow human beings during a time in which innocent people are dying to police violence, famine, extreme weather, plague, and genocide all over the world. Throughout the series, there's an attempt to play America off as a pseudo-Katniss Everdeen character, as a real leader of the people. For example, when America walks through an airport in the first book, she's surprised by a little girl holding up a poster saying something so brave, so thought-provoking. Redheads rule. That's right, everyone, America is so brave because she has red hair. If you could only imagine the hard time she's been through. There are so many stupid and vapid ways this series tries to portray America as a beloved character, and the airport scene is just the most egregious one. Unlike Katniss, however, America fully buys into the regime, and when she's on top of it, is very reluctant to actually change it. Make no mistake, this is an attempt to make America's attitudes acceptable. She's so loved by the people. Look at how brave she is. She deserves to be queen because she'll make everything better. She's the savior of the lowly masses, and they need her to protect them from themselves because she is so smart. It's just one series. It's just a few books. But it adds to the problem instead of helping to solve it. Why did she choose to write it this way? I don't know, and I can't respect an author that doesn't see any problem with adding one more voice to the problem.